Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, March 7, 2025. The U.S. adds 151,000 jobs in February, and the unemployment rate rises from 4% to 4.1%. It's the first monthly jobs report in President Donald Trump's second term. We'll hear from the president and from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, not only about the jobs report, but the future of interest rates and the impact of the president's tariff policies. 1 week until federal government funding expires. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries will be talking about the Republicans' continuing resolution, or CR, proposal, funding extension to run the remainder of the fiscal year at current spending levels. Democrats and some Republicans speak at a Stand Up for Science rally in Washington opposing federal science agency spending cuts, employees, and grants under the Trump administration. President Trump hosts a White House Digital Assets Summit to promote cryptocurrency. The president also asked about the war in Ukraine and his post that he's considering sanctioning Russia because that country continues its large military assault on Ukraine instead of coming to the peace table. And we'll hear from a senator who supports ending the twice-a-year clock switching and making daylight saving time permanent. Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. CNBC writes that job growth was weaker than expected in February, though still stable despite President Donald Trump's efforts to slash the federal workforce. Non-farm payrolls increased by a seasonally adjusted 151,000 on the month, better than the downwardly revised 125,000 in January, but less than the 170,000 consensus forecast from Dow Jones, the Labor Department Bureau of Labor Statistics reported Friday. The unemployment rate edged higher to 4.1%. That was from the CNBC article. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell spoke about the jobs report and also inflation at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business.
Many indicators show that the labor market is solid and broadly in balance. The jobs report released this morning showed employers added 151,000 jobs to payrolls in February, and the unemployment rate ticked up 0.1% to 4.1% last month. Smoothing over the month-to-month volatility, since September, employers have added a solid 200,000 jobs a month on average. The unemployment rate remains low and has held in a narrow range between 3.9% and 4.2% over the past year. The jobs-to-workers gap has narrowed, and the quits rate has moved below pre-pandemic levels. Wages are growing faster than inflation and at a more sustainable pace than earlier in the pandemic recovery. With wage growth moderating and labor supply and demand having moved into better balance, the labor market is not a significant source of inflationary pressure. For inflation has come down a long way from its mid-2022 peak above 7%, without a sharp increase in unemployment. A historically unusual and most welcome outcome. While progress in reducing inflation has been broad-based, recent readings remain somewhat above our 2% objective. The path to sustainably returning inflation to our target has been bumpy, and we expect that to continue. We see ongoing progress in categories that remain elevated, such as housing services and the market-based components of non-housing services. Inflation can be volatile month to month, and we do not overreact to one or two readings that are higher or lower than anticipated.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at the University of Chicago Business School today. In his opening remarks, he also talked about policy changes coming from the Republican Congress and President Trump, but said the Federal Reserve will not rush to cut interest rates until it knows how the changes will affect the economy.
The new administration is in the process of implementing significant policy changes in 4 distinct areas: trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. It is the net effect of these policy changes that will matter for the economy and for the path of monetary policy. While there have been recent developments in some of these areas, especially trade policy, uncertainty around the changes and their likely effects remains high. As we parse the incoming information, we are focused on separating the signal from the noise as the outlook evolves. We do not need to be in a hurry, and we are well positioned to wait for greater clarity. Policy is not on a preset course. If the economy remains strong but inflation does not continue to move sustainably toward 2%, we can maintain policy restraint for longer. If the labor market were to weaken unexpectedly or inflation were to fall more quickly than anticipated, we can ease policy accordingly.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell today at the University of Chicago Business School. After his opening comments, he was interviewed by Professor Anil Kashyap, who asked a question about tariffs. President Donald Trump has said reciprocal tariffs with most countries could start April 2nd.
Okay, the elephant in the room. Economists normally assume that a tariff is passed into domestic prices. And as the Secretary of Treasury said yesterday, that would change the level of prices once, but wouldn't mean anything for inflation a year later. If we're looking at what happens over the next year, how would we know if the conventional view is not correct and that it's leaked into something more troubling?
So I think that start with the general thought is that if there's a spike in prices that's a one-time thing that is going to go through the economy, then it's not appropriate to react to it because our policy by design will reduce employment and activity, and it would not have really been needed to be done. So you look through those things if you can. So if you put that in the context of tariffs, I think if you look at where forecasts are, look at the blue chip, look where everybody's forecasting some inflation effect from tariffs. So it's very likely that if tariffs are imposed, and let's remember, we really don't know what's happening yet. We're at a stage where we're still very uncertain about what will be tariffed, for how long, at what level. We're going to have to wait to see all of that. But the likelihood is that some of that will find its way. It'll hit the exporters, the importers, the retailers, and to some extent the consumers, and we'll see what that is. And in a simple case where we know it's a one-time thing, the textbook would say look through it. But I think the situation you would want to also be sure of a couple of things. One just is that if it turns into a series of things and it's more than that, and if the increases are larger, that would matter. And what really would matter is what's happening with longer-term inflation expectations and how persistent are the inflationary effects. You want to look at all of those things, and you'd want to remember the current context, which is we came off of very high inflation, and we haven't fully returned to 2% on a sustainable basis. So you got to put all that in the mix as you make this decision. I would point people back to 2019, when we had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we had lower immigration, and we had regulatory policy under President Trump in the first regime, and we wound up cutting 3 times because growth weakened so much. So there are many effects of tariffs. And as I pointed out, it's really the effect of all of these policies that matter for our policy. It's not simply what's happening with tariffs. It's what's happening with growth and all the other things as a result of these broad changes in economic policy, not just tariffs.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell today at the University of Chicago Business School. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt posting on X about the jobs report from the Commerce Department. 151,000 jobs created in February. Unemployment rate goes from 4% to 4.1%. In 1 month under President Trump, the American economy is soaring back to greatness after the economic calamity left by Joe Biden. The manufacturing industry is already rebounding as there were 9,000 new auto jobs created, the most auto jobs added in 15 months. Under President Trump, the private sector is leading the way. 93% of the job gains in February were in the private sector. This is great news for American workers and families. The Trump administration will continue to work hard to implement pro-growth policies and push Congress to enact the Trump economic agenda. That was the post from the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. President Trump, in the White House Oval Office, also spoke about the jobs report and focused on the auto industry and also manufacturing jobs.
So we'll talk about the manufacturing turnaround, and it's been very early, but it's pretty significant. The numbers were much better, as you know, than projected by the media, and a little surprising, actually, how strong, how fast, because we have many companies are moving into our country. As you probably know, it's a statistic that everyone talks about, but nobody seems to have done much about. Since the beginning of NAFTA, there's been 90,000 plants and factories closed in this country. Think of that. 90,000 plants and factories have been closed in this country. Many of them have been car manufacturing plants. And that's a terrible statistic, and we'll be turning that around. You're going to see it already. We already have numerous that are being built or starting to be built, and numerous that were being built in other countries, and they stopped, and they're coming here now because of the tariffs. And that's a big deal. That's what you want to hear. During the last year, the Biden administration saw a loss of more than 110,000 manufacturing jobs, or 9,000 manufacturing jobs every single month. It averaged about 9,000 a month, 110,000 manufacturing jobs. During the first full month in office, we've not only stopped that manufacturing collapse, but we've begun to rapidly reverse it and get major gains. We created 10,000 manufacturing jobs in February alone. That hasn't happened in a long time. And these aren't government jobs, which actually we cut. These are private sector manufacturing jobs. So we gained all of those jobs, 10,000 jobs, and we barely started yet. That's a very unusual number. People are surprised by it. I'm even a little surprised. On auto jobs, we created almost 9,000 new jobs in the auto production field. And the reason for that is largely they think things are happening, so they're already geared up. In some cases, they had rooms in their plants, or they had empty plants that they were able to put into use quickly because they see, because of the tariffs, they don't want to be dealing with other places, and they don't want to go back and forth and around and through the borders and across Mexico border and Canada border and all of. They want to have the jobs in one location. And they've had space, and if they had space, they were able to create the jobs almost immediately. In some cases, they'll be building plants to take care of those jobs. So we created 9,000 new jobs already in the auto production, auto parts manufacturing. So we want the auto parts, ideally, and I think from a simplicity standpoint too, to be built and made in the United States. It's in a single month. That all took place in a single month, 9,000 new auto jobs. You haven't heard that in a long time.
President Donald Trump today in the White House Oval Office. Congressman Brendan Boyle, Democrat of Pennsylvania, ranking member on the Budget Committee, putting out a statement. February's jobs report is further proof that Democratic policies rebuilt our economy after Donald Trump's disastrous pandemic response. But warning signs are flashing. Under Trump, reckless tariffs, trade chaos, and instability are driving uncertainty for working families. And if that weren't enough, Republicans are doubling down with the largest proposed cuts to Medicaid in American history and slashing food assistance while grocery prices remain high. It's a betrayal of the middle class, all to serve their billionaire donors. That was part of the statement from Congressman Brendan Boyle, the ranking Democrat on the Budget Committee. NBC News reports that President Donald Trump warned that he may implement tariffs on Canadian dairy and lumber as early as Friday, in what amounts to the latest broadside by his administration in the brewing trade war between the United States and Canada. Trump has whipsawed on tariffs in recent days, imposing sweeping levies on Tuesday before paring back some of them, including goods from Mexico and Canada covered under the country's USMCA trade agreement. Reporting from NBC News, here's President Trump in the Oval Office.
In Canada, we find that they're charging us over 200% for dairy products. You know about that. And when I left, we had that well taken care of. But under Biden, they just kept raising it. Very difficult to deal with, the Canadian representatives. 250% for dairy products, tariff. So where do you hear that? You don't hear that. They have a tremendously high tariff. Give you the exact numbers in a little while coming out, on lumber. So they sell us lumber. They have a tremendous tariff. They make it impossible for us to sell lumber or dairy products into Canada, but our numbers are a tiny fraction of that, almost non-existent. And what we're doing is freeing up our forests from the environmental nonsense that they put on them, where you can't cut down a tree. And we have to cut down trees in order to build the firewalls. And those trees are sold, but we're freeing it up on an emergency basis because Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs for lumber and for dairy products. 250%, nobody ever talks about that. 250% tariff, which is taking advantage of our farmers, so that's not going to happen anymore. They'll be met with the exact same tariff unless they drop it, and that's what reciprocal means. And we may do it as early as today, or we'll wait till Monday or Tuesday. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to charge the same thing. It's not fair. Never has been fair.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat from California, co-chairs the Congressional Ports Opportunity, Renewal, Trade, and Security, acronym PORTS, caucus. His district includes the Port of Long Beach, second busiest in the U.S. He was interviewed today on MSNBC about President Trump's tariff policy.
Let's talk about the on-again, off-again tariffs. The president said yesterday he's not even looking at the stock market. But what do you think is influencing Trump with the back and forth on the tariffs? Wall Street or Main Street or something else?
Who knows? Because whether you talk to Republicans or Democrats, no one has any idea what Donald Trump is doing as it relates to tariffs. Look, I am just blocks away from the single largest seaport in the United States, container seaport here in Long Beach and Los Angeles. The amount of chaos that is happening at America's ports right now is incredibly serious and, quite frankly, dangerous to our economy. I also chair the Congressional Ports Caucus. It's bipartisan. I am talking to port and trade executives across the country, and the uncertainty that is happening right now is causing major issues, not just to ports who are having to plan trucking routes, technology, moving freight, shipping lines, but also to small businesses. Businesses right now are scrambling. They're trying to figure out how they're going to get goods into the country. What's it going to cost? How do I pass those costs on to my employees or to my customers? Because I may not be able to afford what's coming in. And so the chaos that's being created right now at America's ports, who drive much of our economy, especially on our coasts, is really concerning. And Donald Trump has no idea what he's doing. He should visit America's ports. He should come down and talk to port and trade executives and small businesses. And so it's chaos right now in the supply chain, and that's going to do nothing to help the economy. In fact, it's continuing to damage it.
Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, interviewed on MSNBC today. And Wall Street, the Dow up 222, NASDAQ up 126, S&P up 31. From thehill.com, dozens of major conservative activist leaders and organizers are urging conservatives in Congress to support a clean continuing resolution, CR, to avert a government shutdown in a memo organized by the Conservative Action Project. Conservatives support President Trump's efforts to streamline and rebuild a federal government that works for the American people. As the March 14th funding deadline approaches, we support President Trump in his efforts to pass a continuing resolution to September 30th and urge all conservatives in Congress to do the same, reads the memo, set for release Friday, a draft of which was obtained by The Hill. Article goes on, the letter comes as House Republican leaders prepare a clean CR until the end of the fiscal year on September 30th to avert a shutdown. President Trump has backed the plan, and if Democrats do not support the bill in the House, it will need near unanimous support from Republicans to pass in the razor-thin GOP majority. That was from The Hill. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, was interviewed today on Fox News Channel.
The Republican appropriators are negotiating in good faith. They're exchanging top-line negotiation numbers back and forth. And about 2 weeks ago, the Democrats threw into this outrageous requirement, the stipulation, hey, we won't fund the government unless you tie the hands of the executive branch, unless you put in all these stipulations and you take away the authority that they're duly allowed in our system. And we're not going to do that. They know we're not going to do that. So it looked like they were trying to engineer a shutdown of the government, which is terribly irresponsible. We're not going to do that. We will be running a clean CR next week. And what that will do is allow us time, allow the White House time, the administration, to continue the DOGE efforts, finding all these extraordinary levels of savings and waste, fraud, and abuse. We'll be able to incorporate that into the budgeting for FY26, which will start almost immediately after we're done next week. And so that's going to be a great innovation. I think it's going to change the way government works. I was with Elon Musk in his office across this parking lot from the White House about a week ago. Late at night, we're meeting, and I said, we're both getting increasingly excited about all the savings that he's finding. And I said, we're looking at this differently. You think of it as a data analyst and a scientist. I'm looking at this as a constitutional law attorney and a historian. Elon, it's not just about saving money. This is revolutionary. We're going to restore the founders' original vision for the Constitution. They wanted a limited federal government that had careful oversight by Congress, but Congress hasn't been able to do that because they've been hiding the data. He's found it. It's going to change the way we do government.
House Speaker Mike Johnson on Fox News Channel today. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, was asked about the government funding situation at his news conference on Capitol Hill on Thursday.
Mr. Leader, Speaker Johnson said earlier this morning that he expects text to be released of the CR either today or tomorrow. You know, if Republicans continue with this CR to fund the government through the year, is that something Democrats can get on board with, even if you don't like it, or are you still expecting Republicans to do this on their own?
We'll have a conversation as House Democrats on Tuesday morning when we reconvene in the Capitol. We've consistently made clear that top-line numbers were agreed upon in a manner consistent with the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act that Republicans in the House themselves negotiated and supported. A year-long continuing resolution is inconsistent with the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act. And so if Republicans decide to take this approach, as Speaker Johnson indicated, it's his expectation that Republicans are going it alone.
The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, at a news conference on Thursday. Website Notice reports today that Hakeem Jeffries said in a letter to Democrats on Friday that his caucus has no intention of going along with the House GOP's plan to fund the government with a continuing resolution until October. With funding running out in a week, the article says Jeffries' position raises the prospect of a shutdown. Republicans intend to put a continuing resolution on the floor next week that could extend current funding for the rest of the fiscal year after lawmakers have repeatedly failed to agree on new spending levels. Jeffries wrote in a Dear Colleague letter on Friday, Republicans have decided to introduce a partisan continuing resolution that threatens to cut funding for health care, nutritional assistance, and veterans benefits through the end of the current fiscal year. That is not acceptable. Reporting from Notice, N-O-T-U-S. Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, is a member of the conservative House Freedom Caucus. He told Fox News Digital today he'll be a yes on the CR.
The continuing resolution, which just is a stopgap measure to keep the budget from shutting down, and it will expire from another continuing resolution that we passed on March 14th. And yes, I do support this continuing resolution in this instance. And typically, I am not for a continuing resolution because we ought to pass our appropriation bills in time, beginning the June of prior to our October 1 date, which is when our new federal budget starts for 2026. The reason I'm doing that is just what the president said. We are putting the stopgap number on spending at 24 levels, 1.59. And I think that having a government shut down now is not the proper thing. I've never minded it in the past, but here's what's different now. The DOJ Commission, which is identifying waste, fraud, and abuse, is uncovering some things that Americans never thought they would see. I didn't, because we never had access to the government agencies. And now, due to Elon Musk, under the direction of Donald Trump, we're finding all this excess spending that I don't think the public will agree with. But he's putting that out, and it's going to take time to sift through it and separate the good part of what the agencies are doing versus the waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's one thing we can alter the budget. And this is a monumental change that's going to affect spending and will affect our $37 trillion debt issue that we have. This will affect this country for a long time. So I'm excited about getting on board and passing it. We're going to have to do it with Republicans. The continuing resolution will have to be passed. The 218 votes will come from Republicans. The Democrats do not go along with any type of spending cuts, and the perks and the add-ons that they would add and the stipulations are not worth trying to get their vote. So it'll have to be passed from the Republicans, and the Democrats will have to sit back and watch.
Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, interviewed on Fox News Digital. ABC News writes the Trump administration has canceled $400 million worth of grants and contracts to Columbia University for the school's continued inaction in the face of persistent harassment of Jewish students. That's a quote. According to the Justice Department, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Education, and the General Services Administration. Article says at the start of the Israel and Hamas conflict, Columbia was a hotbed of protest. that would often turn violent, with at least one building being overtaken by demonstrators. Colombia, according to the administration, holds about $5 billion in federal grant and contracts.
Science lights the way. I'm gonna let it.
A rally today named Stand Up for Science was held at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., opposing the Trump administration's actions in the science area. Washington Post article reads, organizers say they aren't just pushing back against recent freezes on scientific grants or firings of hundreds of government scientists. They're also demanding an expansion in funding for scientific research and the reinstatement of initiatives on both diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility within government-funded science. And they're calling for an end to political interference in science. That was from the Washington Post. One of the speakers today, Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland.
Are we all here to defend science? Because we know that when you defend science, you are defending the health and welfare of the American people. Isn't that right? Now, I am just thrilled to be here with so many mad scientists. And you should be mad, and you should be angry, and everybody in America should be mad and angry about what we are witnessing right now in our country, including the illegal and reckless attacks on science by Elon Musk and the Trump administration. Because those illegal attacks are literally putting people's lives at risk around the country. Are we going to let that happen? Are we going to shut down the illegal Musk operation? Make no mistake, this has nothing to do with government efficiency. If you care about government efficiency, and we all do, you don't start by firing all of the inspector generals in the United States government, do you? Because when you do that, you're firing the independent watchdogs whose job it is to look out for waste, fraud, and abuse. So when you fire the IGs as your first step, what you're doing is opening the door to waste, fraud, and abuse. And that abuse is what we are seeing right now because Elon Musk and his Doge cronies are not trying to make the government more efficient. What they are doing is slashing important services that benefit all Americans and trying to rig the government to do the bidding of people like Elon Musk. Are we going to let that happen? And we are seeing that, of course, in these attacks on science.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, at the Stand Up for Science rally at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Also there, former Republican Congressman from Michigan, Fred Upton.
Dr. Katrina Armstrong, the CEO and Dean of the Columbia University Irving Medical Center, summed it this way. Look in your medicine cabinet. Do you see a medication for treating a chronic illness or preventing disease? Chances are you can thank the NIH for that. But she's not done. Think about someone who has survived cancer. If not for the NIH, that person might not be with us. Or consider the future of a friend or family member with Alzheimer's disease, a heart condition, or mental illness. Where will we find the treatments to alleviate their sufferings? The answer almost certainly involves the NIH. My friends, I thank you. Thank you for your hard work and courage to do the right thing by choosing this career. We cannot afford to let you go and lose the opportunity for cures that impact all of us across the earth. Francis said a little while ago, yes, we are the envy of the world. first do no harm. I want to add, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. God bless you all.
Fred Upton, former congressman, Republican from Michigan, at the rally near the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. There were similar rallies across the country today. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, posted this video from Chicago.
It's raining and snowing in the Loop in downtown Chicago, but look over my shoulder. Thousands of people have gathered for a rally in the rain. Who are they? They're medical researchers and research scientists who are fighting for federal funding for the projects they've dedicated their lives to. I'm here with them today because I believe in them. I don't believe we can have a great nation by closing the Department of Education or shutting down basic research, medical research in particular. We've got to stand together for our future for research.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, posting that video from Chicago. More from the Washington Post article. White House spokeswoman Taylor Rogers said protesters should be overjoyed that President Trump's commitment to redirect billions of spending away from diversity-oriented projects would free up more money for legitimate scientific research, not less. Rogers said in an email, the Trump administration is committed to slashing waste, fraud, and abuse while increasing transparency of taxpayer spending and how their money is advancing necessary scientific research and development. That was from the Washington Post. From the New York Times, Education Secretary Linda McMahon delivered a stark message on Friday about the future of her agency. Asked on Fox and Friends whether the United States needs this department, Ms. McMahon answered, "No, we don't." In the interview, her first since she was confirmed to her cabinet post this week, Ms. McMahon said that President Trump intended to sign an executive order aimed at closing her department, but she declined to give details on timing. That was from the New York Times. Here's part of the interview on Fox.
I think he certainly intends to sign the order, and we've talked about it. He's made it crystal clear since the time he was running for president that this is his intent. His intent is to provide quality education through school choice to all students. And he wants to make sure that education is back at the state level where it belongs, that our local school boards, that governors and teachers and parents are really the ones that are involved mostly in their children's education.
What exactly would school choice look like? Would he give X amount of dollars that's spent on every student back to the parents? They could choose private school. They could go to any school in the surrounding area or in their county or in their state. What would it look like?
I think there are various programs that we would look at. Scholarship programs. We could use voucher systems to go to different schools. I think there are a lot of ways to provide opportunities to children that are stuck in failing schools. No child should be stuck in a failing school.
Do you know for sure he's definitely going to abolish the Department of Education?
He's been very clear about that. I mean, he couldn't be any more clear when he said he wants me to put myself out of a job.
How did you feel about that?
But, I think there is definitely a role for education to make sure that as we move education back to the states, that we are providing the tools for the governors, for the teachers, that we can provide them with research to show best practices. Because the president's goal really is to see our scores go up. You know, when 70%, of our students cannot read with proficiency, I mean, that's just incredibly difficult to swallow, and he's just not going to accept it.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon interviewed on the Fox News channel today. In a separate interview on News Nation, she said that about 300 Education Department employees out of the 4,500 total took buyouts to quit their jobs of $25,000. Washington Today continues in a moment.
For 46 years, C-SPAN has been your unfiltered window into democracy, giving you direct access to Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House. But this public service isn't guaranteed. C-SPAN receives no government funding and relies on supporters like you. All this month, in honor of Founders Day and Brian Lamb's vision, you can help keep democracy unfiltered.
To the American people, now is the time to tune in to C-SPAN.
Donate now at cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. Story from Politico. President Donald Trump late Thursday signed an executive order authorizing the federal government to stockpile cryptocurrency assets that it seizes through law enforcement proceedings, a move aimed at boosting the digital assets industry. Under the executive order, the federal government will hold on to the Bitcoin assets that federal law enforcement entities seize, which will go into a strategic Bitcoin reserve, according to a post on X by David Sachs, the White House's crypto and artificial intelligence czar. It also authorizes the Treasury and Commerce Departments to develop budget-neutral strategies for acquiring additional Bitcoin, provided that those strategies have no incremental cost on American taxpayers, wrote Sachs, and added that the reserve will not cost taxpayers a dime. That was from Politico. President Trump today held the first ever White House Digital Assets Summit to discuss this and other actions he's taken and plans in the cryptocurrency arena.
And last year, I promised to make America the Bitcoin superpower of the world and the crypto capital of the planet, and we're taking historic action to deliver on that promise, as you know, around the table. Yesterday, I signed an executive order officially creating our strategic Bitcoin reserve, and this will be a virtual Fort Knox for digital gold to be housed within the United States Treasury. That's a big thing, Scott. The federal government is already among the largest holders of Bitcoin, as you know, really one of the largest holders in the world, with as many as 200,000 Bitcoin obtained via civil law and various other forms of law, and including enforcement actions. These existing holdings will form the foundation of the new reserve. Unfortunately, in recent years, the U.S. government has foolishly sold tens of thousands of additional Bitcoin that were worth billions and billions of dollars had they not sold them, but they did sell them, mostly during the Biden administration. And not a good thing to have done. From this day on, America will follow the rule that every Bitcoin knows very well: never sell your Bitcoin. That's a little phrase that they have. I don't know if that's right or not. Who the hell knows, right? Who knows? Who knows? But so far, it's been right. And well, let's keep it that way. The Treasury and Commerce Departments will also explore new pathways to accumulate additional Bitcoin holdings for the reserve, provided it's done at no cost to the taxpayers. We don't want any cost to the taxpayers. In addition, my order directs federal agencies to conduct an inventory of all crypto assets currently held by the U.S. government and determine how they can be transferred easily to the Treasury. Non-Bitcoin digital assets will be held in a new U.S. digital asset stockpile where they will be managed properly. My administration also is working to end the federal bureaucracy's war on crypto, which was really going on pretty wildly during Biden until the election came about. About 5 months before the election, he became a big fan because he heard how many people were in favor of it and how many people love it and respect it. But I guess it didn't work out too well for him. People understood what was going on and paved the way for groundbreaking innovations in institutional finance. Under the Bitcoin administration, regulators strong-armed banks. I mean, they really did. They strong-armed banks into closing the accounts of crypto businesses and entrepreneurs, effectively blocking some money transfers to and from exchanges, and they weaponized government against the entire industry. But I know that feeling also. Maybe better than you do. All of that will soon be over, and we are ending Operation Choke Point 2.0.
President Donald Trump at today's White House Digital Assets Summit. From Bloomberg Law, a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rule targeting digital payment platforms run by Apple, Alphabet's Google, and Meta platforms, Facebook, is one step closer to repeal after the Senate voted to eliminate it. The Senate on Wednesday voted 51-47 to abolish the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's larger participant rule for digital payment companies using the Congressional Review Act. Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican of Nebraska, introduced the disapproval resolution last week. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, joined with Democrats opposing the measure. That was from Bloomberg Law. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, spoke on the Senate floor before the vote.
Today's vote on this Congressional Review Act resolution could not be more straightforward. Vote yes if you want more Americans to get scammed. Vote no if you don't. Vote yes if you want Elon Musk to have a get-out-of-jail-free card when he scams people on X money. Vote no if you don't. 3/4 of Americans use digital payment platforms like Venmo and Cash App, And reports of scams on those sites have skyrocketed. So the CFPB investigated and then stepped in with a new rule to help prevent this fraud. The CFPB's rule also helps protect consumer privacy, and it combats debanking on these platforms. Now, ask any American how much they like getting scammed and whether they think there should be stronger protections against it. And listen to how angry people get over these scams. Look, nobody wants to be scammed, and no one wants fewer protections against getting scammed. In fact, the only people who want weaker rules against scamming are the guys who run the scams. And that may explain why Elon Musk is hoping that the Senate kills this new rule today, because Elon's new X-Money digital payment platform would be subject to CFPB review. Elon wants to take the cop off the beat. He wants what amounts to a get-out-of-jail-free for Elon card, and that is what the vote today would actually give him.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, on the Senate floor on Wednesday before the 51-47 vote to overturn this CFPB rule on digital payment platform oversight. The joint resolution now goes to the House. This is Washington Today. Story from Reuters. U.S. President Donald Trump raised the prospect of imposing large-scale U.S. sanctions on Russia on Friday, days after pausing military aid and intelligence support to Ukraine, and he called on both countries to get on with negotiating a peace deal. President Trump posting on Truth Social, based on the fact that Russia is absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now, I am strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and final settlement agreement on peace is reached. To Russia and Ukraine, get to the table right now before it is too late. Thank you. That was the post from President Trump, as reported by Reuters, and the president was asked about it today during a news conference in the Oval Office.
President Putin is bombing Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you still believe him when he tells you that he wants peace?
Yeah, no, I believe him. I think we're doing very well with Russia. But right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine, and I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now. And I put a statement in, a very strong statement. Can't do that. You can't do that.
Mr. President.
We're trying to help them. And Ukraine has to get on the ball and get a job done. Michael, could you come up here? I see Michael back there. Yeah, good. I'm glad. He's traveling all over the world. I just saw him come in the door. Could you give a little definition of what's going on, please?
Sure.
National Security Advisor Michael Waltz
has been crystal clear, and he's been clear to all sides. The fighting has to stop. Both sides need to get to the table. We had a good engagement. Both leaders have said only President Trump could do so, and only he has been able to do so. We had an initial engagement with the Russians. The Ukrainians had a great opportunity to bind our economies together through that mineral deal. Unfortunately, that didn't go so well, but we think we're going to get things back on track. Secretary Rubio, myself and the Ukrainian delegation will be meeting in Saudi Arabia next week to get these talks back on track, get the ceasefire in place, and drive peace home under President Trump's leadership.
I think both parties want to settle. I think if I wasn't president, this war would have had no chance of settlement, zero chance. But I think we're going to get it settled and stopped. We got to stop. They're losing on average 2,000 soldiers a week. That's a lot of soldiers. Do you agree, Peter?
It's a lot of soldiers on both sides. I agree. Do you, Mr. President, think that Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of the U.S. pause right now on intelligence and military aid to Ukraine?
No, I actually think he's doing what anybody else would do. I think he wants to get it stopped and settled, and I think he's hitting them harder than he's been hitting them. And I think probably anybody in that position would be doing that right now. He wants to get it ended, and I think Ukraine wants to get it ended, but I don't see, it's crazy. They're taking tremendous punishment. I don't quite get it, but I suspect, Michael, he probably wants to get it ended.
He does, Mr. President. The Russians are taking incredible losses on the front. As the president has said, this is a meat grinder of people, of material, of national treasure, and no one else has any solutions except to let this war continue forever.
National Security Advisor Michael Waltz in the Oval Office with President Donald Trump. BBC News writes that Ukraine has received its first set of funding from the United Kingdom via a scheme which uses the profits from Russian assets held in Europe, according to Ukraine's prime minister. From Associated Press, President Donald Trump sent a letter to Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei seeking a new deal with Tehran to restrain its rapidly advancing nuclear program and replace the one he withdrew America from in his first term in office. Trump's announcement was made in a Fox Business News interview that was recorded on Thursday night and confirmed by the White House on Friday. That was from AP. And finally, on Washington today, President Trump was asked on Thursday about his previous support for making daylight saving time permanent. This weekend, most of America moves the clock ahead 1 hour. President called it a 50-50 issue, half the country supporting, half the country opposed, so he said it's hard to get excited about it. That's no problem for Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican of Alabama, who on Thursday on the Senate floor spoke about a bill he is supporting to make daylight saving time permanent.
By making daylight savings time permanent, Americans would enjoy more sunshine in the evenings. This is so important for many Americans who may not get a chance to get outside during the day. It would allow hardworking Americans to go on a run after work or enable dads to play with their kids outdoors, neighbors grill, and do things together outside. What a thought. Many studies have proven that extra sunlight in the evening can lead to improvements in mental health, physical fitness, economic growth, and well-being. As a founding member of the Senate Maha Caucus, I am very passionate about helping make Americans healthy again. An important part of this is making sure people get enough sleep and more sunlight. Did you know that vitamin D from the sun is linked to preventing many diseases, including cancer? It's true, and many Americans don't get nearly enough of vitamin D, especially those who work at desk jobs and are inside for most of the day, and that has increased since the invention of what we call the computer. Locking the clock is an important first step to helping Americans live healthier lives. It's a simple way we could positively impact the day-to-day life of all Americans. Our farmers are also greatly affected by daylight savings time, as additional sunshine during working hours means more time to work in the fields, which could translate into a more profitable bottom line for anybody that raises a crop.
Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican of Alabama, on the Senate floor on Thursday. The bill introduced in the Senate by Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, is titled the Sunshine Protection Act. There's a bill in the House as well, sponsored by Vern Buchanan, Republican from Florida. The Sunshine Protection Act actually passed the Senate in 2022 by unanimous consent, but was never voted on by the House. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.